What's up guys, I'm Phoenix Master 1 and welcome back for some more Fire Emblem Heroes, and today I'm going to be taking a look at Orson, and this is going to be my comprehensive analysis of him. I'll also suggest some of the best builds that you could run on him, and at the end I'll have a special bonus segment as always. If you guys do end up enjoying these free-to-play unit analysis, then I would really appreciate if you could leave a like and subscribe, and it helps out the channel a lot. So that said, let us begin. Orson is a 168 BST Lance Cavalry unit. He does come with a preferred weapon in Brereft Lance, and this is not that great of a preferred weapon, but it's still decent. So it does give him +3 defense, and it's basically a more convoluted attack defense solo condition present in his weapon. So if he has got no allies within 2 spaces, then he's going to be getting +6 attack and defense. If there is one ally present within 2 spaces, then he's going to be getting +4 attack and defense, and so on. The secondary effect of his weapon does require one or less ally within 2 spaces, and if that condition is met, then he can neutralize any kind of visible buffs of the opponent from stuff like rally skills, tactic skills, and stuff like that. So that pretty much opens up his sloppy skill because he does not have to run loud skill, as he can neutralize the visible buffs of the opponents as it is with this weapon itself. So this weapon might seem good at first, but it's honestly not when you compare it to Flowing Lance. It's basically a bit worse Flowing Lance, or even convoluted Flowing Lance, and I'll show you an example and also elaborate on this point. So here you can see Flowing Lance, Orson, and here you see his preferred weapon. So his preferred weapon's conditions are pretty strict. He needs absolutely no allies within 2 spaces if he wants to get +6 attack and defense, and he will get the dull all effect, which is neutralizing the visible buffs of the opponent, if there is one or less ally within 2 spaces. The problem with this kind of weapon that forces you to have no allies within 2 spaces means that you're not going to be able to support Orson with drive skills, distant guard, units like Brave Lucina and Flame, and any kind of support. And that is not really all that good because cavalry units don't have the best defensive skills and their options are pretty limited, so they a lot of times have to rely on the support. And you might say that Fallen Male Corrin and Fallen Female Corrin both have similar weapons, then why are they not considered bad? Well, the answer to that question is that the payoff is way bigger with their weapons because they can actually get +5 or +6 to all of their stats, and in case of Fallen Male Corrin, he even gets the guard effect. And their stat distribution is much better than Orson, not to mention there's really no other inheritable breath who can do anything similar for these dragons. Compare this to Defense Refined Flowing Lance, you get +5 HP and +4 defense, which is definitely pretty good, and getting +5 HP also means that he has got better magical bulk. And speaking of magical bulk, he basically has better magical bulk with this weapon because Flowing Lance inflicts -4 attack and debuff on the opponent if you're alone. And that attack debuff basically translates to effectively getting +4 resistance because you're debuffing the attack of the opponent. Brereft Lance doesn't really do anything for his resistance or for his magical bulk in comparison. So Flowing Lance actually ends up being better in this case compared to his preferred weapon, and he can also neutralize the attack and defense buffs of the opponent if he's not adjacent to an ally. And this condition is super easy to meet compared to his preferred weapon because you just need to be away from an ally, and that's basically it, compared to his preferred weapon, which requires more things here. And neutralizing buffs of opponents' attack and defense is going to be more than enough most of the time. Even though his preferred weapon can neutralize the speed and resistance debuffs, neutralizing their resistance debuff doesn't really do too much, and he isn't the fastest unit, so most of the time neutralizing their speed buffs isn't really going to be doing too much. And that's why I'm saying this is basically like a convoluted Flowing Lance, which is a shame to see honestly compared to Ashnard, who we got last time as our Fallen Grand Tour Battle unit. So this weapon is definitely underwhelming for a preferred weapon when an inheritable weapon can pretty much do the same thing. And for his stat spread, he does have decent HP for a Cavalier, has 38 base attack, which is pretty good, and he ends up having a really awkward speed stat at 28. He can make this work out at like absolute max investment, but at lower investments this isn't really going to be doing too much for him, and his defense is also pretty high, but then again his resistance is rather low for tanking, but he does have a super boon in resistance, so that could be used as you'll see later on. So overall his preferred weapon and stat spread aren't really all that impressive, and he does face a lot of competition being a Lance Cavalier. We do have Petrine as a Lance Cavalier in the Grail pool, and Petrine is just way more unique with Flame Lance, which gives you the beast effectiveness, which is going to be really helpful for dealing with threats like Fallen Edelgard. She can also target the resistance of the opponent and basically gets more offenses with this weapon. So Petrine ends up being a way better Grail investment because she is far more unique and actually stands out compared to the competition, unlike Orson, who doesn't really do too much with his preferred weapon and his stat spread. If you really want a bulky Lance Cavalier, then we already have existing options like Berkut and Conrad. Sure, they're not going to be having as much attack as him, but still they can function as a bulky Lance Cavalier if that's what you're looking for. Not to mention, just recently, Camus got a weapon refine as well. And Camus might not have as much defense or attack as Orson, but he actually ends up having pretty similar resistance to him because Gradivis does give you +4 to all of your stats, and it also has distant counter built into it, so he can actually run many other slotted skills for like just tanking builds. And he also gets consistent healing from Gradivis, which is really good for self-sufficiency. So Camus is also a pretty good option if you want to invest into a Lance Cavalier from the Grail options. And all of these other units which I've mentioned, they all cost less Grails because they have all got runs from their Grandeur battles. So overall, Orson is a decent unit with a decent preferred weapon, but he doesn't really stand out that much, and it's a bit underwhelming to see him when you compare him to last year's Fallen Grandeur battle unit, Ashnard. So if you're looking for a bulky Lance Cavalier, then you can build him up, and like I said, his preferred weapon is decent, but it's nothing really too impressive, especially when an inheritable weapon can pretty much do the same thing. Orson has got one of the best arts in the game, so many people might want to build him up just because of his art and voice acting, and that's totally fair, but outside of that, there's not really much like incentive to build him up because Lance Cavalry units are extremely saturated, and as it is, his preferred weapon doesn't really help him too much because it's just a convoluted flowing lance, and he doesn't really bring anything new to the table compared to someone like Petrine or even Camus now because he's got a weapon refine. His resistance and speed are in a really awkward position, and there are also other bulky Lance Cavaliers that you could build up in less cost. And he doesn't really stand out much or do anything too unique in competitive game modes like Arena or Aether raids. So if you really focus on those game modes, then Orson isn't really going to be the unit that you want to build. If you want to use Orson on a budget, then that could definitely be done, and you can just give him Reposition and Steady Stance 3 from Silas and have Quick Riposte in the slot B. He already gets the dull effect from his weapons, so Quick Riposte is pretty much going to be one of the best options that he could run on his slot B, and Attack Defense Solo does have good synergy with Rouse Attack Defense and his preferred weapon. We can also run Guard in slot B to deny the special accelerations of the opponents, and that is a pretty good option, especially when he's rather slow. And in Arena Assault, if you want to use him, then you can simply run Deathblow and have Swordbreaker. And his Brereft Lance is actually going to be helping you quite a lot in Arena Assault because everyone and their mom uses rally skills. So being able to just ignore those visible buffs is going to be pretty helpful with his preferred weapon on a budget if you're going to be using him in Arena Assault. And now let's move on to the high investment builds for Orson if you really want to plus and merge him. So Attack Defense Solo goes really well with his weapon and his Rouse skill, and it does function in both phases, so it could just be stacked up with Attack Defense Solo Sacred Seal, and he can be a very tanky unit at plus and merge when it comes to his physical bulk, and that is going to be pretty nice. You can also run Sturdy Stance 3 in slot A, and that gives you the guard effect, so you don't really have to run guard in slot B now, and you can just run Quick Riposte and have Mystic Boost Sacred Seal for some self-sufficiency. You can also run Attack Smoke on slot C if you just want to debuff the attack of the opponent, and that can actually help you if you're already buffing his attack and defense. You can also run Distant Foil on him because he does have pretty good defense, and with Guard and Quick Riposte you can definitely deal with a lot of annoying dagger units and bow units. Finally, if you want to invest a lot into him, then this is going to be the build which I would recommend. You can actually make use of the resistance super boon that he has got going, so you can opt for that and add absolute max investment with summoner support and everything. And with Speed Rest Solo Sacred Seal, with max investment, he ends up reaching 40 resistance, which is not bad at all for using distant counter, and the extra speed does bring him to the point where if you boost him up and support him a bit more, then he can definitely avoid doubles from many of the opponents. And Attack Defense Menace is a very premium skill from female Fallen Morgan, but if you're thinking of highly investing into Orson, then this could be definitely helpful because you get the attack debuff on the opponent and you also buff him up too. So it's pretty much like a Roused Attack Defense but much more premium, and it actually helps him with his magical bulk because you will be getting the attack debuff on the opponent, but on a budget you could of course run Attack Smoke. And because he doesn't have too many slot B options and you don't really want to run loud skill with his weapon because he can already ignore the visible buffs of the opponents, then a trace skill like speed defense trace could be an option if you invest into his speed. And he can definitely get pretty fast if you just invest all of it in speed, and this pretty much makes him as a dual phase Cavalier because he can use the counter of near trace and the debuffs can also help him, so he ends up reaching 54 speed. You can also use Orson in Arena whenever B Duel Cavalry 4 comes out, and his weapon I would argue is much better in something like Arena because again everyone uses rally skills there, so being able to ignore that is really good, and he doesn't really have to run loud skill in slot B and can instead run guard or defense res ruse, which you can get from the divine code section, and this is pretty much his best option if you really want to use him in Arena. Having a cavalry unit can definitely help you with the mobility, but you will have to make sure that there's no ally within 2 spaces of him if you want to get the max effect out of his weapon. His high bulk can definitely help you against the melee matchups basically. And then finally, if you want to use him in Aether raids, then I wouldn't really recommend him too much because he doesn't have access to null follow-up to deal with Bramimont in the light season, and if you use him in the Aster season, then he's not going to be having the extra resistance from air or dagger, so he's not going to be that bulky. And his preferred weapon isn't really all that good in Aether raids, and he can get attack and defense debuff neutralization, and that is going to be pretty helpful in Aether raids. The first build is pretty much accessible from the divine code section and 3-star 4-star units, so that could be done. But if you want to invest even more into him for Aether raids, then I would definitely suggest Flowing Lance. And like I said before, it does help him with his magical bulk, so it actually ends up being better than his preferred weapon in Aether raids. And you just need to be 1 space away from your ally and it will activate, unlike his preferred weapon, which is, much more strict. So you can invest into his speed heavily, and this can allow him to basically speed stack, which is rather easy to do in the light season, and he can be pretty fast and also be decently bulky with having the resistance buff from air and dagger. And you can also run lull attack speed just so that you can neutralize the speed buffs of the opponents as well and get even more attack debuffs, and can also run pulse smoke, which is going to be pretty helpful in many situations. Orson is a pretty interesting minor villain in Sacred Stones, and his art is absolutely top tier, and the fallen units are usually pretty strong, so it was kinda annoying to see that his preferred weapon isn't really up to the mark in my opinion. So this is what I would do to make Orson better and to improve him. So first of all, I would actually make him a Sword Cavalier because he uses Rune Sword against you when you face him, so that's why I think having Sword Cavalry is much better, and it was really out of the blue how they made him a Lance Cavalry unit in my opinion. So this accelerates your special trigger by -1, and it does have adaptive damage, which is going to be really cool and unique for a Sword Cavalry unit, and it also gives you passive healing after each hit, which is going to be super good. So implementing Rune Sword like this is going to be pretty nice in Fae. We already have Rune Axe on Narcian, but this kind of Dark Rune Sword on Orson would have been really cool, and the secondary effect would pretty much be a better effect than his preferred weapon. So if the number of allies within 2 spaces is 1 or less, then he can inflict -4 debuff to the opponent's stats during the combat, and it also neutralizes any kind of their buffs. So I'm pretty much trying to improve the condition of it. I have left the 1 ally condition there because it pretty much symbolizes Monica, his wife, and this could have been pretty easily made into a solo condition, but I purposely wanted to save that 1 ally condition right there. So this would have been a pretty cool throwback to Sacred Stone's Orson with his Rune Sword, and this would have been a much better unit in my opinion because I've actually made changes to his stat distribution. I would actually make him faster with base 35 speed and actually lower his HP and defense by a bit, and also resistance, so he pretty much ends up becoming a melee duelist with a unique preferred weapon. Sword Cavalry units have a lot of competition, it's really competitive, but still he would have been a unique unit at the very least compared to whatever he is now as a Lance Cavalier. So let me know in the comments what you think about this theory craft, and make sure to share this video with your friends who are looking to build up Orson or were just excited to see him in Fae. I want to thank all of my YouTube members for their constant support, and if you enjoyed, then please be sure to leave a like and a comment. Helps me tremendously, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because YouTube sub boxes are about as functional as Orson's weapon when there are a lot of allies near him. So that's it, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.